My friend joked about my miscarriage being practice. Her husband didn't know about her abortion. I lost my best friend and my baby in the same month. Only one of those losses actually hurt. I'd been trying to conceive for 3 years. My best friend Sarah knew every detail, every negative test, every fertility appointment, every injection. She held my hand through 2 failed IUIs and 1 round of IVF. When I finally got pregnant, she was the first person I called at 5 a.m., sobbing with joy. Sarah had been married to Tom for 4 years. Perfect Christian couple, church leadership, purity culture advocates. She led their pro-life ministry and had choose life in her bio. Tom desperately wanted kids, but Sarah always had excuses. I lost the baby at 11 weeks. Not just a missed miscarriage, but a traumatic emergency room at 2 a.m. miscarriage. I held what would have been my daughter in my hands. We named her Lily. Sarah was supportive for exactly 2 weeks. Then her patience expired. "You need to move on," she said at lunch. "Women have miscarriages every day. Our grandmothers had 5 kids and 3 miscarriages and still cooked dinner." Then came her cousin's baby shower. Sarah insisted I attend for healing. She literally showed up at my house and dragged me there. I lasted 20 minutes before breaking down when someone asked, "When are you having kids?" Sarah found me crying in the bathroom. That's when she said it. "Get over this. Think of it as practice for the real thing. A test run. At least now you know you can get pregnant. Some of us don't even want kids and have to deal with—" She stopped, but her face said everything. "Practice?" I whispered. "My daughter dying was practice?" She doubled down. It wasn't even a real baby yet. Just cells. First trimester doesn't count. This from the woman who posts "life begins at conception" memes daily. I left. She texted later. "Sorry if you took that wrong. Hormones are crazy after these things. But something bothered me. Some of us don't even want kids and have to deal with what?" Then I remembered. 3 years ago, right before their wedding, Sarah had emergency surgery for stomach flu. Tom was at his bachelor party in Vegas. I'd driven her to the hospital, but she'd insisted I leave. I did something I'm not proud of. I still had her Apple Watch logged into my phone. Her health app synced automatically. There it was. 3 years ago. Procedure, D and C. 7 weeks after Tom's bachelor party where she'd cheated with his best man, Mark. She'd had an abortion. Which is her choice, her right. But this woman who called me murderer adjacent for miscarrying? Who led protests outside Planned Parenthood? Who told me my baby wasn't real? I sat on this for a week. Then she posted on Facebook, "Please pray for my friend struggling with her loss. Sometimes God spares us from raising babies who would suffer. His plan is perfect." People asked if my baby was wrong, if I'd done something to cause it. My phone exploded with messages asking what defect God had spared her from. I commented, "My baby was perfectly healthy. Sarah knows this. Just like she knows not all pregnancies end in birth. Some end by miscarriage, some by choice. Who hasn't kept secrets about reproductive health? Judge not, Sarah." She deleted it immediately. But screenshots spread through our friend group. Tom called that night, confused. What did Sarah keep secret about reproductive health? I told him to ask about her stomach flu 3 years ago, and ask Mark why he'd been weird at their wedding. The truth came out in pieces. The procedure, the cheating, the years of hidden birth control while pretending to try. Their church found out. Tom filed for divorce. Sarah lost everything: marriage, church position, friends. She moved back with parents who barely speak to her. She sent one text. "You ruined my life over a joke." I replied, "You called my daughter's death practice." I thought that was the end. I was wrong. 6 months later, I'm pregnant again. 20 weeks. Another girl. Sarah's blocked everywhere, but mutual friends keep me updated. She's spiraling, posting increasingly unhinged things about fake Christians and baby killers. Last week, she tried crashing my baby shower. Security turned her away. She'd brought a gift. I didn't open it until after everyone left. Inside was a onesie that said, "Practice makes perfect," and an envelope. I expected another cruel note. Instead, I found medical records. But not Sarah's. They were mine. From my fertility clinic. Pages and pages of treatment records, test results, private information, things only clinic staff could access. At the bottom, a sticky note in Sarah's handwriting. "Check page 47. I flipped to it. It was a genetic screening report from my IVF cycle, one I'd never seen before. The doctor had said everything was normal, but this report, dated 3 weeks before my miscarriage, showed something else entirely. High-risk markers, recommendations for immediate intervention, a specialist referral that was never made. And at the bottom, in the notes section, patient not informed per doctor. Cooper's instructions. Husband requested information be withheld pending further testing. My husband never wanted further testing. He didn't even know about this report. But someone had signed the authorization to withhold it. The signature was barely legible, but familiar. It was Tom's. Sarah's husband had been at my fertility appointments because Sarah insisted, said he was supporting us both. He'd had access to everything. My hands shaking, I turned the page. There was a photo. A screenshot from the clinic's security footage, dated the day of that report. It showed Tom at the reception desk, handing something to the nurse. Behind him, slightly out of focus but unmistakable, was Sarah. She was smiling. At the bottom of the photo, Sarah had written, "Your miscarriage wasn't random. Check the prenatal vitamins I gave you." Tom knew exactly what would happen. "Did you really think he'd let you have a baby before me?" I sat on my living room floor with papers everywhere, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold Sarah's note. The words kept running through my head like a sick song I couldn't stop. Check the prenatal vitamins. Tom knew exactly what would happen. My stomach turned over and over. I looked down at my belly, 20 weeks pregnant, and suddenly this baby felt so fragile, so easy to hurt. What if they were planning something right now? What if Sarah had already done something and I just didn't know it yet? I grabbed my phone and called my husband's work number. My voice came out weird and high when his secretary answered. "I need him home right now. It's an emergency." She must have heard something scary in my voice because she didn't ask questions, just said she'd find him immediately. I stayed on the floor, surrounded by all those medical records Sarah had somehow gotten her hands on. Page after page of my private information, my fertility treatments, my test results. Things only doctors should see. And there in the middle of it all was that report dated 3 weeks before I lost Lily. High-risk markers. Needs immediate intervention. Specialist referral required. But nobody ever told me. No. Dr. Cooper had looked me right in the eye and said everything looked great, keep taking your vitamins, we'll see you in 2 weeks. And then Tom's signature on that form saying to hide it from me. Tom, who Sarah had insisted come to my appointments to support us both. Tom, who I'd trusted completely because he was married to my best friend. The front door opened 30 minutes later and my husband ran in, his face white with panic. "What happened? Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" I couldn't even answer at first, just shoved the papers at him. He sat down next to me on the floor and started reading. I watched his face change as he went through everything. The genetic screening report. The note from Dr. Cooper about withholding information. The signature. When he got to the photo of Tom at the clinic with Sarah in the background, both of them smiling, he made a sound like someone had punched him in the stomach. He picked up the authorization form and stared at Tom's signature for a long time. His hands were shaking now too. "Tom came to a few of your early appointments. Sarah asked him to support us both since she couldn't always make it. I remember he seemed really interested in the whole process. Asked a lot of questions. I thought he was just being supportive." His voice got quieter. "He had access to everything. He could have signed anything. He could have talked to Dr. Cooper without us knowing." We both just sat there for a minute, trying to make sense of it. Then I showed him Sarah's note about the vitamins. "Check the prenatal vitamins I gave you." Tom knew exactly what would happen. My husband's face went from white to gray. "That's not possible. That's too horrible. Nobody would do that." But even as he said it, I could see him remembering. Sarah had given me those vitamins about a month into my pregnancy with Lily. She'd said they were a special blend her naturopath recommended, way better than the regular ones. I'd trusted her completely and thrown away my old bottle to make room for hers. My husband grabbed his phone and pulled up Tom's number. "I'm calling him right now. I'm going to make him explain this." But when he hit call, it went straight to voicemail. He tried 3 more times. Same thing. We looked at each other and I felt this cold feeling spread through my chest. He knew this was coming. He's been waiting for us to find out. That's why Sarah gave me the records now. She wanted us to know, but she also wanted to give Tom time to prepare. I grabbed my husband's arm before he could try calling again. We can't just confront them. If Sarah's telling the truth, if they really did something to Lily, we need proof. We need evidence. If we just call them up and yell, they'll deny everything, and we'll never be able to prove what happened. He started to argue, but I kept going. And what if they try something with this baby? What if they're planning something right now and confronting them makes them do it faster? We need professional help. We need to make sure this pregnancy is safe first. Then we can figure out how to prove what they did. He closed his eyes for a second, and I could see him fighting between wanting to destroy Tom right that minute and knowing I was right. Okay. What do we do first? I was already pulling up my OB's emergency number on my phone. We make sure the baby's safe. We tell the doctor what Sarah's claiming, and we get checked out. Then we figure out the rest. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial, but I managed to hit the right buttons. The on-call doctor answered after 2 rings, and I tried to explain without completely falling apart. "I think someone might have tampered with my prenatal vitamins during my last pregnancy. The one I lost at 11 weeks. I need to make sure my current baby is okay. I need to come in right now." The doctor's voice got very serious very fast. "Come to the hospital immediately. Bring the vitamin bottle if you still have it and any medical records about your previous pregnancy. We'll run tests and make sure everything is okay with your current baby. Don't eat or drink anything until we check you out." I hung up and ran to the bathroom, my husband right behind me. I tore through the cabinet under the sink, throwing out old bottles and boxes. "Please be here. Please be here." And then my hand closed around it, pushed way in the back behind a stack of towels. The vitamin bottle Sarah had given me 3 years ago. I'd never thrown it away because it felt like throwing away the last connection to Lily, the last thing I'd been doing to take care of her. I clutched the bottle in my hand and ran back to get the medical records. My husband grabbed his keys and we were in the car 30 seconds later. He drove fast, running 2 yellow lights that were almost red. I held the vitamin bottle in one hand and the stack of papers in the other, trying not to think about what it meant if Sarah was telling the truth. If these vitamins in my hand had killed my baby. If Tom and Sarah had planned it together. If I'd taken poison every single day thinking I was helping Lily grow strong. The hospital emergency entrance was bright and cold, and I gave my name to the receptionist with my voice shaking. So bad she had to ask me to repeat it twice. The on-call OB came out to get us herself instead of sending a nurse. She was younger than my regular doctor, maybe 40, with kind eyes that got more worried the longer she looked at my face. She took us back to an exam room and had me change into a gown while she talked to my husband in the hallway. I could hear their voices through the door but not the words. She came back in and did a full exam, asking questions the whole time about when I'd last taken any vitamins or supplements. I told her I'd switched to a different brand as soon as I got pregnant this time. Hadn't touched anything Sarah had ever given me. She nodded and wrote notes. Then she squeezed gel on my belly and turned on the ultrasound machine. The screen lit up and there was the baby, moving around, heart beating fast and strong. The doctor measured everything, checked all the organs, looked at blood flow. After what felt like hours, she turned to us with a small smile. Your baby looks completely healthy. All measurements are perfect for 20 weeks. Whatever happened during your first pregnancy, it's not affecting this one. I started crying so hard I couldn't breathe. My husband held my hand and cried too. The doctor gave us a minute, then got serious again. I'm sending your vitamin bottle to our forensic toxicology lab. They'll test it for anything that shouldn't be there. That process takes several weeks, maybe a month. But I'm also documenting everything you've told me today in your medical file and flagging it as a potential criminal matter. If those vitamins were tampered with, that's poisoning. That's attempted murder. She looked right at me. I need you to walk me through your previous miscarriage. Every detail you can remember. So I told her everything. How I'd been feeling great at 10 weeks, no problems at all. Then one night I woke up at midnight with cramps. By 1 a.m. I was bleeding. By 2 a.m. my husband was driving me to the ER with me screaming in pain. How they'd done an ultrasound and couldn't find a heartbeat. How I'd delivered Lily in the ER at 4 in the morning, held her tiny body in my hands, saw her perfect fingers and toes. How the doctor had said sometimes these things just happen. There's no explanation. It wasn't my fault. The OB's face got darker and darker as I talked. She pulled out the medical records I'd brought and read through them carefully, especially the genetic screening report. When she finished reading, she looked up at us with an expression I couldn't quite figure out. This report shows high-risk markers that should have triggered immediate action. You should have been sent to a specialist within days. You should have had additional testing and monitoring. Instead, according to these notes, Dr. Cooper told you everything was fine and sent you home. She tapped the paper. If this withholding was intentional, that's medical malpractice. And if it was connected to someone tampering with your vitamins, that's conspiracy. She picked up her phone. I'm going to connect you with someone who can help you process all of this. Her name is Michaela Westbrook. She specializes in pregnancy loss and medical trauma. You need support right now, not just for what happened to your first baby, but for dealing with these revelations while you're pregnant with your second. Michaela had an office in the same medical building and somehow had an opening that evening. The OB walked us over herself, carrying copies of all my records. Michaela was probably 50, with gray hair and a calm voice that made me feel a little less like I was going to fall apart completely. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. Sarah's cruelty after I lost Lily. How I'd exposed her abortion and destroyed her life. Her spiral over the past 6 months. The gift at my baby shower with my stolen medical records. The accusations about Tom and poisoned vitamins. When I finished, Michaela leaned forward in her chair. What you're experiencing right now is trauma. Whether Sarah's accusations turn out to be true or false, the possibility that your baby's death might have been intentional is deeply traumatic. You need to know that however you're feeling right now, whatever thoughts are going through your head, that's all valid. She looked at my husband too. Both of you are going to need support through this. Finding out the truth is important, but so is taking care of yourselves and your baby. She scheduled me for twice weekly sessions and gave us her emergency number. Call me anytime, day or night, if you need to talk. That night, my husband and I lay in bed not sleeping. He kept saying we should go to the police right away, file a report, get Tom and Sarah arrested before they could try anything else. I wanted that too, but I was also scared. What if we accuse them and we're wrong? What if the vitamins test clean and we just look crazy and mean? What if Tom sues us for lying about him? My husband rolled over to face me in the dark. If they did this, if they really killed our baby, they might try to hurt this one too. We can't wait. But I couldn't shake the feeling that rushing in without proof would make everything worse. We went back and forth for hours until finally we agreed on a compromise. First thing in the morning, we'd find a lawyer, someone who handles medical malpractice and criminal cases. We'd get legal advice about what evidence we needed and how to protect ourselves. Then we'd decide about the police. I barely slept, just lay there with my hand on my belly, feeling the baby move, thinking about Lily and whether she'd moved like this before she died. In the morning, I got online and searched for medical malpractice lawyers who'd handled pregnancy loss cases. One name kept coming up: Fiona Rainey. Her website said she specialized in fertility medicine malpractice and wrongful death. I called her office as soon as they opened at 9 and somehow got through to her directly instead of a secretary. I started explaining and she stopped me after about 30 seconds. This sounds extremely serious and complex. I need to see all your documentation in person. Can you come to my office this afternoon? Bring everything you have. Medical records, communications with the doctors, anything Sarah or Tom ever sent you. Everything. Her office was downtown in a tall building with marble floors. Fiona was maybe 60, with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back tight. Her husband Richard worked with her, a private investigator who specialized in medical cases. We spread everything out on her big conference table, and they went through it all for 2 hours, barely talking except to ask us questions. Fiona picked up the genetic screening report and studied it for a long time. If this document is real, Dr. Cooper committed clear medical malpractice by withholding it from you. This should have changed your entire treatment plan. She looked at the signature line. And if Tom really signed this authorization, that's damning. But we need to verify it's his actual signature, not a forgery. Richard was looking at the security camera photo of Tom and Sarah at the clinic. This is circumstantial, but it's powerful. It shows they were there together, which contradicts the story that Tom was just supporting you innocently. He made some notes on a legal pad. I recommend we authenticate this footage with the clinic and try to get their full security records from that time period. We need to know every time Tom visited, who he talked to, what access he had to your files. Fiona nodded and turned to us. You have 3 potential paths forward. Medical malpractice lawsuit against Dr. Cooper and the clinic. Civil lawsuit against Tom and Sarah for intentional harm and conspiracy. And criminal charges if the vitamin tests come back showing tampering. Each path has different evidence requirements and different timelines. She paused. The question is how much stress you can handle while you're pregnant. Because this is going to be hard and it's going to take time. I told Fiona we needed to know what our options were, and she nodded slowly. She explained we had 3 different paths we could take. First was a medical malpractice lawsuit against Dr. Cooper and the fertility clinic for withholding the genetic screening results. Second was a civil lawsuit against Tom and Sarah for intentional harm and conspiracy. Third was criminal charges if the vitamin test came back showing they'd been tampered with. She warned us that criminal prosecution would be the hardest route because we'd need to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Tom and Sarah deliberately poisoned me. That meant establishing motive, opportunity, and direct evidence of tampering. The civil cases had a lower burden of proof, but could drag on for years. She looked at my pregnant belly and asked how much stress I could handle while carrying this baby. My husband squeezed my hand and said we'd do whatever it took, but Fiona shook her head and said that wasn't the right answer. She needed me to be realistic about my limits because stress could affect the pregnancy, and we had to protect this baby first. Richard leaned forward and said he could take on most of the investigation work, so we wouldn't have to be involved in every detail. He offered to investigate Tom and Sarah's connection to the fertility clinic more thoroughly. He wanted to find out if Tom had made other visits beyond what the security footage showed. He also wanted to know if any clinic staff had noticed suspicious behavior, or if anyone remembered Tom asking unusual questions about my treatment. Richard suggested we try to obtain Sarah's phone records and emails from the time period around my first pregnancy. If we could find evidence of communication between Tom and Sarah about my medical care, that would strengthen our case significantly. Fiona cautioned that obtaining private communications would be difficult without a subpoena, but Richard said he had contacts who might be able to help us build a case strong enough to justify legal discovery. He explained that if we could show probable cause that a crime occurred, we could get court orders for phone records and emails. My husband asked how much all of this would cost, and Fiona pulled out a retainer agreement. The number made me feel sick, but she said she'd work with us on payment plans if needed. Richard added that the stronger our evidence, the more likely we'd get a settlement that would cover our legal costs. We sat there for a long time looking at the paperwork. Finally, my husband said we didn't have a choice because if Tom and Sarah really did this, they couldn't get away with it. I signed the retainer agreement that afternoon even though the cost scared me. We needed professional help to navigate this nightmare, and Fiona and Richard were the best option we had. Fiona's first step was to send a formal letter to Dr. Cooper and the fertility clinic, demanding my complete medical records and an explanation for why the genetic screening results were withheld. She also filed a complaint with the state medical board against Dr. Cooper for potential misconduct. She explained that the complaint would trigger an automatic investigation even before we had the toxicology results back. The medical board took these things seriously, and Dr. Cooper would have to respond within 30 days. Richard started his investigation the next morning by making a list of everyone who knew Tom and Sarah during my first pregnancy. Over the next week, he interviewed friends, co-workers, and church members who might have information about Tom's state of mind back then. He discovered that Tom had been increasingly desperate for children and resentful that Sarah kept finding excuses to delay. Several friends confirmed this in recorded conversations that Richard played for us in Fiona's office. One of Tom's former co-workers revealed something that made my stomach turn. The co-worker said Tom had made disturbing comments about how some people don't deserve to be parents and how nature has a way of correcting mistakes. Richard asked what Tom meant by that. and the coworker said Tom seemed to be talking about people who got pregnant easily, while others struggled. The coworker had thought it was just bitter talk from someone dealing with a difficult marriage, but now it sounded like something darker. Richard also tracked down Mark, Tom's former best man who Sarah had cheated with 3 years ago. Richard convinced him to talk by explaining that Sarah had been making accusations that could implicate him too. Mark agreed to meet at a coffee shop, and Richard recorded the whole conversation. Mark admitted that after Sarah's abortion 3 years ago, Tom became obsessed with the idea that Sarah had stolen his chance at fatherhood. Tom started talking about how unfair it was that I was getting fertility treatment while Sarah refused to even try for a baby. Mark said Tom's comments made him uncomfortable, especially when Tom said things like some people appreciate what they have and others throw it away. Mark had never imagined Tom would actually do anything harmful, but looking back, the signs were there. He said he'd be willing to testify about Tom's state of mind if we needed him to. While Richard was gathering evidence, I tried to maintain my normal life and take care of my current pregnancy. But the stress was overwhelming and I was having trouble sleeping or eating properly. My husband scheduled an appointment with Michaela and she helped me develop coping strategies. She reminded me that my baby needed me to stay as calm as possible, which meant setting boundaries around how much time I spent obsessing over the investigation each day. We agreed that my husband would take over most communication with Fiona and Richard, so I could focus on staying healthy. I insisted on being informed of major developments, but I didn't need to know every small detail of the investigation. 2 weeks after we sent the vitamins for testing, the forensic toxicology lab called with preliminary results. The lab technician's voice was serious when she explained what they'd found. The vitamin capsules contained not only the expected prenatal nutrients, but also significant amounts of pennyroyal oil and black cohosh. Both substances were known to cause uterine contractions and miscarriage. The tampering was sophisticated because someone had carefully opened the capsules, added the harmful substances, and resealed them so perfectly that I'd never noticed anything wrong when I took them daily during my first pregnancy. My hands shook as I wrote down everything the technician said. The lab was sending a full written report to Fiona, but they wanted to give us the preliminary findings right away because of the criminal implications. Fiona called Detective Gregory Massey that same day and provided him with the toxicology report, medical records, and all the evidence we'd gathered about Tom and Sarah's involvement. Detective Massey specialized in poisoning cases, and he took our situation seriously. He told Fiona that the toxicology results proved a crime had occurred, and the documentary evidence pointing to Tom and Sarah gave him probable cause to investigate further. He explained that he'd need to interview me formally, obtain warrants for Tom and Sarah's phone records and computers, and try to trace where they might have obtained pennyroyal oil and black cohosh. The detective scheduled my formal interview for 2 days later at the police station. I walked him through the entire timeline, starting with how Sarah gave me the vitamins claiming they were a special blend her naturopath recommended. I explained how I'd trusted her completely and took them every day without question. I described the miscarriage at 11 weeks, how it happened just as the genetic screening report was being hidden, and how Sarah's recent gift had revealed the conspiracy. Detective Massey was particularly interested in the timing. He noted that if Tom knew about the high-risk markers from the genetic screening, he and Sarah might have seen it as an opportunity to cause a miscarriage that would look natural. He assured me he'd pursue this aggressively because poisoning a pregnant woman was a serious felony. Within a week, Detective Massey obtained search warrants for Tom and Sarah's residences. The searches yielded evidence that strengthened our case dramatically. At Tom's apartment, police found a journal where he'd written extensively about his anger and resentment. The entries talked about Sarah's abortion and how she'd stolen his chance at fatherhood. They also mentioned me, saying I was flaunting my fertility treatments while he remained childless. More damning were the receipts police found from an online herbal supplier. Tom had purchased pennyroyal oil and black cohosh 3 years ago, just weeks before Sarah gave me the tampered vitamins. At Sarah's parents' house, police found her laptop and phone during the search. The devices contained text messages between Sarah and Tom from 3 years ago. The messages made my stomach turn when Detective Massey showed them to us later. Sarah had written to Tom about my pregnancy with words that felt like knives. She called me trusting in a way that made it sound like an insult. She wrote that I would take anything she gave me without question. Tom's response was worse. He told her he had something that would solve both their problems. Later messages showed them planning Tom's visits to the fertility clinic. They discussed the genetic screening results like they were talking about the weather. Sarah wrote that the timing was perfect. She said no one would suspect anything if it happened right then. The messages went on for weeks. They mocked my hope. They laughed about my innocence. They planned every detail of what they would do to me and my baby. Detective Massey called us to his office 3 days after the searches. He wanted to review all the evidence before making arrests. My husband drove us there on a gray morning that matched how I felt inside. We sat across from the detective's desk while he laid out printed copies of the text messages. Reading them destroyed something in me that I didn't know could break. These were people I had trusted completely. Sarah had held my hand through every fertility treatment. She had cried with me through every failure. Tom had been there because Sarah asked him to support us both. And the whole time, they had been plotting to kill my baby. The messages showed Sarah's jealousy burning through every word. She wrote that I didn't deserve what she had thrown away. She said watching me be happy with my pregnancy made her sick. Tom's messages revealed something even darker. He saw hurting me as revenge against Sarah for her abortion. He wrote that if he couldn't have the family he wanted, then no one else deserved one either. They had fed off each other's anger and resentment until they convinced themselves that poisoning me was justified. Detective Massey explained that he had enough evidence to arrest both of them. The toxicology report proved the vitamins were poisoned. The text messages showed planning and intent. Tom's journal revealed his twisted thinking. The purchase receipts tied him directly to buying the poison. He said the charges would be conspiracy to commit assault, poisoning, and reckless endangerment of an unborn child. My husband asked how long they would go to prison if convicted. The detective said it depended on the trial, but these were serious felonies. He warned us that the arrests would happen within 24 hours. He wanted us to be prepared for media attention because cases like this always attracted reporters. The next morning, police arrested Tom at his apartment. He tried to run when he saw the officers at his door. They caught him in the parking lot and handcuffed him while neighbors watched. The arrest shocked people who knew him because Tom had kept up his respectable image even after the divorce. He went to church. He volunteered. He acted like a good person. Sarah's arrest happened an hour later at her parents' house. Her mother screamed at the police. Her father just stood there looking broken. Sarah didn't fight or run. She seemed almost relieved that it was finally happening. Her public spiral had been leading to this moment. Both of them were held on high bail because of how serious the charges were and how strong the evidence looked. The arrests made the local news that same evening. My phone started ringing with calls from reporters wanting to interview me. They were calling it the baby shower revenge case. The name made me angry because this wasn't about revenge. This was about my daughter being murdered. Fiona called and told me not to talk to any reporters. She said anything I said could affect the criminal trial. She was also worried about the stress the media attention would put on my pregnancy. My husband and I talked about it that night. We decided to have Fiona issue a statement for us. The statement said we were grieving what happened to Lily. It said we hoped justice would be served. It said we wouldn't be doing any interviews. The reporters kept calling anyway. I stopped answering my phone unless I recognized the number. Fiona moved forward with the civil lawsuit while the criminal case was building. She filed against Tom, Sarah, Dr. Cooper, and the fertility clinic. The lawsuit listed wrongful death, medical malpractice, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She explained that we were seeking damages for my medical expenses, my emotional suffering, and the loss of my daughter. She was honest that no amount of money could really make up for what was taken from us. But she said the civil case would probably settle before trial because the evidence was so strong. The criminal charges being filed made the civil case even stronger. Companies and people usually settled when they knew they would lose at trial. Dr. Cooper's attorney contacted Fiona within 3 days of the lawsuit being filed. The attorney sounded panicked on the phone when Fiona told me about the call. He admitted that Dr. Cooper had made a terrible error in judgment. He said Tom had convinced the doctor to withhold the genetic screening results. Tom had claimed it was necessary to avoid causing me stress until more testing could be done. Fiona tore apart that excuse when she responded. She pointed out that withholding critical medical information violated every standard of care that exists. She said Dr. Cooper should have recognized immediately that Tom's request was suspicious. Tom wasn't my spouse. He wasn't my medical proxy. He had no legal right to access my information or make decisions about what I was told. The attorney tried to argue that Dr. Cooper had been manipulated. Fiona said that didn't matter because a doctor's first duty is to the patient, not to someone else's husband. The fertility clinic's insurance company reached out quickly, too. They wanted to settle the malpractice claim to avoid the publicity of a trial. Daniela Sharma, the clinic administrator, cooperated fully with our investigation. She provided complete records showing every time Tom had visited the clinic. The records proved he had been there multiple times. He always came when Sarah was supposedly there to support me. He had managed to access my files by claiming he was there on Sarah's behalf. The clinic admitted their security protocols had been inadequate. Staff should have questioned why Tom was so interested in my medical information. Staff should have verified his relationship to me before giving him any access. The insurance company offered a settlement that would cover all my medical expenses for both pregnancies plus additional damages. Fiona said it was a fair offer and recommended we accept it. The legal cases moved forward over the next several weeks. I tried to focus on my current pregnancy and taking care of myself. But learning that Lily's death was murder instead of a random miscarriage made the grief completely different. Michaela helped me process what she called complex grief. I had lost my daughter twice. First to the miscarriage itself, now to the knowledge that she was deliberately taken from me. The second loss felt almost worse than the first. I attended therapy twice a week. Michaela also connected me with a support group for parents who had lost children to violence. Sitting in that circle of people who understood made me feel less alone. They knew what it was like to have someone steal your child from you. They knew the special kind of anger that comes with that loss. My husband struggled with tremendous guilt during this time. He blamed himself because his friendship with Tom had enabled the conspiracy. His presence at my appointments had given Tom access to everything. He tortured himself with what-if questions. What if he had been more suspicious of Tom's interest in my medical care? What if he had questioned why Sarah kept asking Tom to come along to appointments? What if he had reviewed my medical records more carefully and noticed the missing genetic screening report? He barely slept. He stopped eating properly. Michaela started seeing him individually to help him work through the guilt. She explained that he was a victim of Tom and Sarah's manipulation, not someone who helped them commit their crime. Tom and Sarah had deliberately used his trust and his friendship to get what they needed. That wasn't his fault. At 24 weeks pregnant, I had an amniocentesis to check for any genetic issues with my current baby. The needle going into my belly terrified me. I kept thinking about everything that had gone wrong with Lily. But I needed to know this baby was okay. The results came back a week later. Everything was completely normal. The relief was so strong it made me cry. But the relief was mixed with something bitter. I realized that if Dr. Ed Cooper had done his job properly 3 years ago, Lily might have had the specialist care she needed. The genetic screening had shown high risk markers. A specialist could have monitored her more closely. They could have caught problems early. They might have been able to save her. The knowledge that my first daughter might still be alive if not for this conspiracy was almost too much to bear. I had to work hard not to let the anger consume me completely. Michaela reminded me that anger was normal, but I couldn't let it hurt this baby. I had to find a way to carry both the grief and the hope at the same time. A few days after the amniocentesis results came back, Detective Massey called to update us on Tom's legal situation. Tom's attorney had reached out to the prosecutor's office trying to negotiate a plea deal. The attorney wanted Tom to testify against Sarah in exchange for reduced charges. The detective explained that the prosecutor had rejected the offer immediately. The evidence against both Tom and Sarah was equally strong. The text messages showed them planning together. The journal entries proved Tom's active participation. The purchase receipts for the pennyroyal oil and black cohosh had Tom's name on them. There was no reason to give him a deal when the case against him was already solid. My husband asked what Tom's defense strategy would be now. Detective Massey said Tom's attorney was going to argue that Sarah had manipulated him into participating. They would claim he was acting under emotional distress from his failing marriage. They'd try to paint him as a victim of Sarah's influence rather than an equal partner in the conspiracy. The detective pulled out copies of Tom's journal entries and text messages to show us why that defense wouldn't work. The journal showed Tom actively researching ways to cause miscarriages. The texts showed him enthusiastically discussing the plan with Sarah. One message had Tom writing about how he'd found the perfect substances to use. Another had him saying he was excited to finally take action. These weren't the words of someone being manipulated. These were the words of someone who wanted this to happen. I felt sick reading them again. Tom had purchased the poisonous substances himself. He'd signed the authorization to withhold my genetic screening results. He'd gone to my fertility appointments specifically to access my medical information. Every single action showed deliberate choice and planning. The idea that he would try to blame everything on Sarah made me furious. They were equal partners in murdering my daughter. Neither of them deserved to escape responsibility by pointing fingers at the other. The prosecutor scheduled a meeting with us to discuss Tom's defense strategy and prepare us for what might come up at trial. She explained that Tom's attorney would likely try to make Sarah look like the mastermind. They'd emphasize her mental health issues and her history of deception about her abortion. They'd try to argue that Tom was a grieving husband who got caught up in his wife's twisted revenge plot. The prosecutor said this strategy wouldn't work because the evidence showed Tom had his own motives. His journal entries talked about his resentment toward me for having fertility treatment while he remained childless. His texts with Sarah showed him suggesting ideas for the poisoning. He wasn't just following Sarah's lead. He was an active, willing participant who had his own reasons for wanting to hurt me. The prosecutor asked if we'd be willing to testify about Tom's involvement in my medical appointments. She wanted to establish that Tom had deliberately positioned himself to access my private information. My husband agreed to testify about how Tom had asked to come along to appointments. I agreed to testify about how I'd trusted Tom because he was Sarah's husband, and I thought he was there to support us. Meanwhile, Sarah's legal situation was getting more complicated. Her attorney filed a motion arguing that she wasn't competent to stand trial. The attorney claimed Sarah was suffering from severe depression and possible psychosis. They said she couldn't understand the charges against her or assist in her own defense. The judge ordered a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation to determine Sarah's competency. The evaluation took several weeks. A forensic psychiatrist met with Sarah multiple times at the jail. The psychiatrist reviewed her medical records and interviewed her extensively. Finally, the evaluation results came back. The psychiatrist found that while Sarah was experiencing mental health issues, she understood the charges against her. She could communicate with her attorney. She could participate in her own defense. The competency challenge failed. Sarah would stand trial. However, the evaluation did document that Sarah had been experiencing a complete psychological breakdown since losing her marriage and community. The psychiatrist noted that Sarah showed signs of severe depression and anxiety. She had difficulty sleeping and eating. She spent most of her time in her cell crying or staring at the walls. Sarah's attorney planned to use this information as a mitigating factor at sentencing. They'd argue that while Sarah was competent to stand trial, her mental state at the time of the crime had been severely impaired. I understood that Sarah was struggling. I could even feel some sympathy for how much she'd lost. But I couldn't accept mental illness as an excuse for what she'd done. Sarah had been functional enough to research poisonous substances online. She'd been functional enough to carefully plan the timing of when to give me the tampered vitamins. She'd been functional enough to coordinate with Tom and cover their tracks. Mental illness might explain some of her behavior, but it didn't erase her responsibility for murdering my baby. Richard continued his investigation, even as the criminal case moved forward. He wanted to build the strongest possible case for our civil lawsuit. One day he called us with new information that made everything even worse. He'd obtained Sarah's computer and phone records through a subpoena. The search history on her laptop went back weeks before she gave me the tampered vitamins. Richard read us some of the search queries. Sarah had searched for herbs that cause miscarriage. She'd searched for how to make someone lose a baby without getting caught. She'd searched for symptoms of natural miscarriage versus poisoning. She'd visited forums where people discussed herbal abortion methods. She'd read medical articles about substances that cause uterine contractions. The search history showed careful research over an extended period. This wasn't an impulsive decision made in a moment of anger. Sarah had spent weeks learning exactly how to cause a miscarriage that would look natural. She'd researched the symptoms I would experience. She'd learned how to cover her tracks. The evidence completely destroyed any argument that the poisoning was unplanned or spontaneous. Richard also found text messages between Sarah and Tom discussing the research. Sarah had sent Tom links to articles about pennyroyal oil. Tom had responded with information about where to buy it online. They'd discussed dosages and how to hide the substances in vitamin capsules. They'd planned every detail together. Reading through the evidence, I realized how much effort they'd put into killing my daughter. This wasn't a crime of passion or a mistake made in the heat of the moment. This was premeditated murder that they'd researched and planned for weeks. Several months after the arrests, the state medical board completed its investigation of Dr. Cooper. They found him guilty of gross negligence and ethical violations. The board determined that withholding my genetic screening results was a catastrophic breach of medical standards. Dr. Cooper had violated his duty to provide me with complete information about my pregnancy. He'd allowed someone who wasn't my spouse or medical proxy to influence my care. He'd put Tom's request above my right to know about risks to my baby. The medical board revoked Dr. Cooper's license permanently. He could never practice medicine again in any state. The decision felt like meaningful accountability, even though it couldn't undo the harm he'd caused. If Dr. Cooper had given me the genetic screening results when they came in, I would have seen a specialist. The specialist might have been able to monitor Lily more closely. They might have caught problems early. They might have been able to save her. Dr. Cooper's decision to withhold information had enabled Tom and Sarah's murder plot by making the miscarriage look more natural. The fertility clinic also settled our malpractice lawsuit. Their insurance company wanted to avoid the publicity of a trial. The settlement amount was substantial. It would cover all my medical expenses for both pregnancies. It would cover my therapy costs. It would provide financial security for our family. More importantly, the clinic agreed to implement new security protocols. They would restrict who could access patient information. They would require verification before releasing any medical records. They would train staff to recognize suspicious requests. The changes wouldn't help me, but they might protect future patients from having their privacy violated the way mine had been. As my pregnancy moved into the third trimester, my medical care became even more careful and controlled. I started seeing a maternal fetal medicine specialist who reviewed every aspect of my care. The specialist knew everything that had happened during my first pregnancy. She knew about the hidden genetic screening results. She knew about the poisoning. She knew about the trauma I'd experienced. The specialist ordered frequent ultrasounds to monitor the baby's growth and development. She did regular tests to check for any complications. She reviewed my diet and supplements to make sure everything was safe. She gave me her personal cell phone number to call if I had any concerns at all. My husband attended every single appointment with me. We'd made a firm decision that no one else would ever be involved in my medical care again. No friends, no family members. Just the two of us and my carefully vetted medical team. We trusted no one but each other and the doctors who were treating me. The specialist understood our caution completely. She made sure all my appointments were private. She confirmed that my medical records were secure and that no one could access them without my explicit permission. She created a care plan that addressed both my physical needs and my emotional trauma. Every appointment was thorough and reassuring. The baby was growing perfectly. All the tests came back normal. There were no signs of any problems. The specialist told me repeatedly that this pregnancy was completely healthy. But I couldn't fully relax until the baby was born safely. Every day I worried that something would go wrong. Every twinge or change made me panic. Michaela worked with me on managing the anxiety. She reminded me that this baby was not Lily. This pregnancy was different. I was monitored carefully. I was safe. But the fear stayed with me constantly. When I reached 32 weeks pregnant, the prosecutor contacted us about the trial date. Tom and Sarah's criminal trial was scheduled to begin in 3 weeks. The prosecutor asked if I was willing to testify despite my advanced pregnancy. She explained that my testimony would be crucial to the case. The jury needed to hear directly from me about my relationship with Sarah, my trust in Tom, and the impact of losing Lily. I wanted to testify. I needed to look Tom and Sarah in the eye and tell the court what they'd taken from me. I needed to make sure the jury understood that Lily was a real person who deserved to live. I needed to speak for my daughter who never got the chance to speak for herself. But I was also scared. The idea of facing Tom and Sarah terrified me. I'd have to sit in the same room with the people who murdered my baby. I'd have to answer questions while they watched. I'd have to relive the worst moments of my life in front of strangers. My husband worried that the stress would be too much for me and the baby. Fiona worried that the defense attorneys would try to upset me deliberately. Michaela worried that testifying would re-traumatize me. But I insisted. I told them all that I needed to do this. Lily deserved to have her mother fight for justice. I couldn't let Tom and Sarah's attorneys tell lies about what happened without challenging them. Fiona and Michaela agreed to help me prepare for the testimony. We spent several sessions going over the questions the prosecutor would ask. We practiced how I'd respond to aggressive cross-examination. We developed strategies for staying calm if the defense attorneys tried to upset me. Michaela taught me breathing exercises to use if I started to panic. She helped me plan what I'd do if the emotions became overwhelming. She reminded me that I could ask for breaks if I needed them. The judge would accommodate my pregnancy. Fiona explained exactly what would happen in the courtroom. She told me where I'd sit. She described how the questioning would work. She prepared me for seeing Tom and Sarah at the defense table. She warned me that they might try to look sympathetic or remorseful to influence the jury. By the time the trial date approached, I felt as ready as I could be. I was still scared, but I was also determined. Tom and Sarah had taken so much from me. They weren't going to take my voice too. The trial began on a cold morning in late October. The courthouse was packed with people who'd been following the case in the news. The story of the poisoned prenatal vitamins and the fertility clinic conspiracy had attracted significant media attention. Reporters lined the hallway outside the courtroom. Camera crews waited on the courthouse steps. My husband and I arrived early with Fiona. We used a side entrance to avoid the media. Inside the courtroom, I saw Tom and Sarah for the first time since their arrests. They sat at separate defense tables with their attorneys. Tom looked thinner and older than I remembered. Sarah looked hollow and broken. Neither of them would look at me when we entered. The jury selection had been completed the day before. 12 jurors and 2 alternates sat in the jury box. They looked like ordinary people. Some were young, some were older. Several were women who might understand what it meant to lose a pregnancy. The prosecutor began with opening statements. She walked the jury through the entire case. She explained my fertility struggles and my friendship with Sarah. She described Tom's access to my medical information. She outlined the conspiracy to poison me. She showed the jury photos of the tampered vitamin capsules and the substances Tom had purchased online. Then it was the defense attorney's turns. Tom's attorney argued that Tom had been manipulated by Sarah. Sarah's attorney argued that Sarah had been suffering from mental illness. Both attorneys tried to minimize their client's responsibility. Both attorneys suggested that the other person was more to blame. I sat in the gallery watching them try to rewrite history. They were trying to make Tom and Sarah look like victims instead of murderers. After the opening statements, the prosecutor called me to testify. I walked to the witness stand with my hand on my pregnant belly. The bailiff swore me in. I sat down and looked out at the courtroom. Tom and Sarah were right there at their defense tables. The jury was watching me carefully. My husband sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table. I took a deep breath and began to tell my story. I testified for 3 hours that first day. The prosecutor asked me to walk the jury through everything. I started with my fertility struggles and the 3 years of trying to conceive. I explained the failed IUIS and the IVF cycle. I described how supportive Sarah had been through all of it, how she'd held my hand at appointments, how she'd celebrated with me when I finally got pregnant. I told the jury about the joy of that first positive test, how I'd called Sarah at 5 in the morning to share the news, how she'd cried happy tears with me, how I'd trusted her completely. Then I described the miscarriage, the sudden bleeding at 11 weeks, the rush to the emergency room at 2 in the morning, holding Lily's tiny body in my hands, the trauma of losing her. I had to stop several times to compose myself. The judge offered me breaks, but I wanted to keep going. I needed to get through this. I told the jury about Sarah's cruel comments afterward, how she'd called my daughter's death practice, how she'd said Lily wasn't real because she was only first trimester, how Sarah had insisted I attend her cousin's baby shower when I was still grieving. The prosecutor showed the jury Sarah's text messages, the ones where she'd mocked my grief, the ones where she'd minimized Lily's death. Several jurors looked upset reading them. Then I explained how I'd discovered Sarah's abortion, how I'd exposed her hypocrisy, how she'd lost everything. I was honest about my role in that. I told the jury I'd been angry and hurt. I'd wanted Sarah to face consequences for her cruelty, but I'd never imagined she'd want revenge like this. The prosecutor asked me about Tom's involvement in my medical care. I explained that Tom had come to several of my early fertility appointments. Sarah had asked him to come because she said he wanted to support both of us. I'd thought it was kind of him. I'd trusted him because he was Sarah's husband. I had no idea he was accessing my private medical information. I had no idea he was planning to use that access to hurt me. The prosecutor showed the jury the genetic screening report that had been hidden from me. She showed them Tom's signature on the authorization to withhold information. She showed them the security footage of Tom at the clinic with Sarah in the background. I testified about receiving the tampered vitamins from Sarah, how she'd told me they were a special blend her naturopath recommended, how I'd taken them every day because I trusted her completely, how I'd never suspected anything was wrong. The prosecutor showed the jury the toxicology report. She had an expert explain how the pennyroyal oil and black cohosh would have caused my miscarriage. The expert testified that the substances would have triggered strong uterine contractions. They would have caused the sudden bleeding and cramping I'd experienced. They would have made the miscarriage look natural. When the prosecutor showed the jury the text messages between Tom and Sarah plotting to poison me, several jurors looked visibly upset. One woman in the back row was crying as she read Sarah's message about me being too trusting. Another juror shook his head in disgust. I could see that the evidence was affecting them. They understood what had been done to me and to Lily. The jury came back after 6 hours. I sat in the courtroom with my husband's hand gripping mine so hard my fingers went numb. The foreman stood up and read the verdicts one by one. Guilty on all counts for Tom. Guilty on all counts for Sarah. I heard the words, but they felt distant, like someone was speaking underwater. My husband squeezed my hand tighter, and I looked over to see tears running down his face. Tom's lawyer started arguing something, but the judge shut him down fast. 2 bailiffs walked over to Tom and Sarah and put handcuffs on them. Sarah started crying loud, making these awful choking sounds. Tom just stared straight ahead like he wasn't really there anymore. They led them both out through the side door, and Sarah kept looking back at me. Her face was red and twisted up. I put my hand on my belly and felt the baby move under my palm. I made a promise right there that I would never let anyone hurt this one. Never. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. By then I was 36 weeks pregnant and my doctor had put me on partial bed rest because my blood pressure was too high. I told her I had to be there and she said fine, but I needed to take it easy. My husband drove me to the courthouse and helped me walk in because my ankles were so swollen I could barely fit my feet into shoes. The courtroom was packed again. More people than before because the case had been all over the news. I had written my victim impact statement on my laptop at home. Going over it so many times I had most of it memorized. When the judge called my name, I stood up slow and walked to the front. My husband stayed right behind me in case I needed help. I stood at the podium and looked at Tom and Sarah sitting at their separate tables with their lawyers. Neither of them would look at me. I started reading. I told the court about Lily. How we'd picked out her name together, my husband and me, sitting on the couch one night looking at baby name books. How I'd held her tiny body in my hands in that hospital room. How perfect she was even though she was so small. How for 3 years I'd thought it was just bad luck. Just one of those terrible things that happens. How learning it was murder had broken something inside me that I didn't think would ever heal completely. I explained that Tom and Sarah hadn't just killed my daughter. They'd stolen my ability to trust people. They'd taken away my faith in friendship. They'd made me afraid of the world in a way I'd never been before. My voice shook when I talked about how I'd trusted Sarah with everything. How I'd let her into the most private parts of my life. How she'd used that trust to destroy me. When I finished reading, the judge thanked me and told me to sit down. I walked back to my seat and my husband put his arm around me. The baby kicked hard against my ribs like she was reminding me she was there. The judge took about 10 minutes to deliver the sentences. He looked right at Tom and said 15 years in prison for conspiracy, poisoning, and reckless endangerment. He called Tom's actions a profound betrayal of trust and a calculated attack on the most vulnerable. Tom's face went white, but he didn't say anything. Then the judge turned to Sarah. 12 years because of her mental health issues, but he made it very clear that mental illness wasn't an excuse for deliberately causing the death of an unborn child. Sarah started sobbing again. That same loud choking sound. Her lawyer tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away. The judge explained that both of them would be eligible for parole after serving 85% of their sentences. That meant at least a decade in prison for both of them. Maybe more if the parole board decided they were still dangerous. The bailiffs came and took them away again. This time Sarah didn't look back at me. This time she just kept her head down and cried. After the sentencing, Fiona met with us in one of the courthouse conference rooms. She had papers spread out on the table. The civil settlement with Cooper was finalized. He was paying significant damages from his personal assets, because his malpractice insurance had limits on what it would cover. Fiona walked us through the numbers. There was a structured payout that would fund my therapy for as long as I needed it. Money for any medical expenses related to the trauma. Money that would provide financial security for our family. But the most important part, the part that made me cry when Fiona read it out loud, was the formal apology Cooper had to write. He had to acknowledge his catastrophic failure. He had to admit in writing that his actions contributed to Lily's death. Fiona handed me the letter. I read it twice. Cooper's handwriting was shaky and hard to read in places. He wrote that he had violated his oath as a doctor. He wrote that he had failed me in the worst possible way. He wrote that he would have to live with what he'd done for the rest of his life. I folded the letter and put it in my purse. It didn't bring Lily back, but it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was truth on paper that couldn't be taken away. 2 weeks after the sentencing, at 38 weeks pregnant, I woke up at 3 in the morning with contractions. They were different from the Braxton Hicks I'd been having for weeks. These hurt. Really hurt. I shook my husband awake and told him it was time. He jumped out of bed and started running around the house grabbing things we'd already packed in the hospital bag weeks ago. I had to tell him to slow down, that we had time, that first babies usually take a while. We got to the hospital at 4 in the morning. They put me in a delivery room and hooked me up to monitors. The baby's heartbeat was strong and steady. My contractions got closer together and stronger. By noon, I was ready to push. The delivery took 2 hours. 2 hours of the hardest physical work I'd ever done in my life. And then she was here. The doctor put her on my chest, and she was warm and wet and screaming. She was perfect. She was alive. We named her Hope because that's what she was. Hope that our family could survive. Hope that we could heal. Hope that life could be good again after everything that had happened. My husband stood next to the bed crying and holding my hand. I was crying too. But we were also laughing because Hope was here, and she was healthy and she was ours. The nurse cleaned her up and weighed her. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. She had dark hair like mine and my husband's nose. When they gave her back to me, I held her close and breathed in that new baby smell. And I thought about Lily. About how I should have 2 daughters right now instead of 1. About how Lily should be 3 years old, running around and talking and being a big sister. The joy of holding Hope and the grief of losing Lily existed in the same space in my chest. Both feelings were real. Both feelings were true. My husband leaned over and kissed Hope's forehead. Then he kissed mine. We stayed like that for a long time, the 3 of us, feeling the full weight of everything we'd been through to get to this moment. In the weeks after Hope's birth, I struggled. The postpartum anxiety was bad. Really bad. I couldn't sleep even when Hope was sleeping because I kept having to check that she was breathing. I'd put my hand on her chest just to feel it rise and fall. Sometimes I'd check 5 or 6 times in an hour. I started having panic attacks when anyone else held her. Even my husband. Even my mom. I was afraid something would happen if I wasn't watching her every second. Michaela started seeing me twice a week instead of once. She helped me understand that what I was feeling was normal given everything that had happened. She taught me techniques to separate legitimate concerns about Hope's safety from trauma-driven hypervigilance. She reminded me that Hope was not Lily. That Hope's story was her own. That I couldn't protect her from everything no matter how hard I tried. My husband and I worked together to create routines that felt safe. We took turns with night feedings, so we both got some sleep. We limited visitors for the first month. We said no to people who wanted to come over and hold the baby. We built a little bubble around our family, and slowly, very slowly, I started to feel like I could breathe again. Like maybe we were going to be okay. 3 months after Hope's birth, a letter came in the mail. It had been forwarded through the prison system. The return address showed it was from Sarah. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Part of me wanted to throw it away without reading it. But another part of me needed to know what she had to say. The letter was 6 pages long, front and back. Sarah's handwriting was messy and hard to read. She wrote that she'd been in intensive psychiatric treatment since going to prison. She wrote that she was finally starting to understand the full horror of what she'd done. The letter rambled. It jumped around. In some parts, she sounded genuinely sorry. In other parts, she sounded like she was feeling sorry for herself. She wrote about her jealousy and her pain over her own abortion. She wrote that those feelings had twisted into something dark inside her. She wrote that Tom had encouraged her worst impulses, that they'd fed off each other's anger and resentment until they'd convinced themselves that harming me was somehow justified. She wrote that she knew nothing she could say would make it better, that she didn't expect forgiveness, that she just wanted me to know she understood now what she'd taken from me. I read the letter once. Then I put it back in the envelope and stuck it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to engage with it. Wasn't ready to think about Sarah's remorse or her explanations. Michaela told me that was okay, that I might want to respond someday as part of my healing process. But right now, I needed to focus on Hope, on my own recovery, on building the life we'd fought so hard to have. Sarah's remorse, whether it was genuine or not, didn't change what happened to Lily. It didn't undo the damage, and I didn't owe Sarah forgiveness or understanding just because she was finally facing the reality of what she'd done. Tom sent a letter too. It came a week after Sarah's. His was shorter, only 2 pages, and it was different in tone. Tom wrote that he'd been driven to madness by Sarah's betrayal, that he'd never intended for things to go as far as they did, that he'd made a terrible mistake. The letter was defensive. It was full of excuses. He framed himself as a victim of circumstances who'd lost control. I read the first paragraph and stopped. I could see exactly what he was doing. He was still trying to minimize his role, still trying to make it sound like he'd just gotten caught up in something rather than actively planning and executing it. I put the letter back in the envelope without finishing it. I didn't have any interest in Tom's self-serving rationalizations. He'd bought the poison. He'd accessed my medical records. He'd signed the authorization to withhold information that could have saved Lily. Those were choices. Active choices. Not mistakes. Not things that just happened to him. I threw his letter in the trash. As Hope grew and reached her 6-month milestone, something shifted inside me. I found myself thinking about Lily differently. The pain was still there, but it wasn't as sharp. It didn't cut me every time her name crossed my mind. I could remember her with sadness, but also with a kind of peace. I created a small memorial for her in our home. A shadow box that hung on the wall in the living room. Inside were her ultrasound pictures. The tiny blanket the hospital had given me. A photo of the cherry blossom tree we'd planted in her memory in our backyard. When Hope got old enough to notice it, I would tell her about her sister. I would make sure she knew that our family carried both joy and loss, that life could be beautiful even after tragedy. That love didn't end just because someone was gone. My husband and I stood in front of the shadow box one evening while Hope napped in her crib upstairs. He put his arm around me and we looked at Lily's ultrasound pictures together. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. We both understood that Lily would always be part of our family, that we would carry her with us, and that Hope would grow up knowing she had a sister who came before her. A sister who was loved. A sister who mattered. The civil lawsuit moved forward even while Tom and Sarah sat in prison cells. Fiona explained that criminal convictions made the civil case almost automatic. The court seized what little assets they had. Tom's apartment had some furniture and a car. Sarah had nothing but clothes and some old jewelry. The total came to maybe $30,000 after everything sold. It wasn't much money, but that wasn't really the point. I wanted them to know that even from prison, they were still paying for what they did. Every single thing they owned would go toward trying to make this right, even though nothing could actually make it right. Fiona set up a trust fund for Hope with most of the money. The rest went to 3 different organizations that helped parents dealing with pregnancy loss. One group provided free counseling. Another paid for funeral costs when families couldn't afford them. The third one funded research into preventing miscarriages. Turning their evil into something that might help other people felt important. It felt like taking back some control. A year passed. Hope learned to walk and started saying real words. I went back to work part-time. Life started feeling almost normal again, except it never really could be normal after everything that happened. Then I got an email from someone named James Sparks, who said he made documentaries. He'd followed the trial in the news and wanted to tell our story. He thought it could help other people understand how vulnerable pregnant women are and why medical ethics matter so much. I deleted the email at first. The idea of reliving everything on camera made me feel sick, but it kept bothering me over the next few days. I talked to my husband about it. He said it was completely my choice, but he understood if I wanted Lily's story to mean something bigger than just our private pain. I called Michaela and asked what she thought. She said it might actually help with my healing to take control of the narrative instead of letting other people define what happened to us. So I emailed James back and agreed to meet with him. We met at a coffee shop downtown. James was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with glasses and a notebook full of questions. He explained that he wanted to focus on 3 main things. First, the conspiracy itself and how Tom and Sarah planned everything. Second, the investigation and how Detective Massey and Richard pieced together the evidence. Third, the legal battle and what it took to get justice. He said the documentary would end with me holding hope and talking about healing after betrayal. He promised he wouldn't sensationalize anything or make it feel exploitative. He wanted to make something that honored Lily, while also educating people about the gaps in our system that let this happen. I liked that he kept saying Lily's name. A lot of people avoided saying it, like they thought it would hurt me more. But hearing her name out loud from someone who understood she was a real person who mattered made me trust him a little. We spent 6 months working on the documentary. James interviewed me and my husband for hours. He talked to Detective Massey and Richard about the investigation. Fiona explained the legal process. He even got the prosecutor to participate. James found old security footage from the fertility clinic and photos from the trial. He used the text messages between Tom and Sarah, reading them out loud while showing their mugshots on screen. The hardest part was filming me at Lily's memorial tree. James wanted me to talk about her while standing there, and I broke down crying 3 times before I could get through it. But he was patient and kind. He never pushed me to say more than I was ready to say. When he showed me the rough cut of the documentary, I cried through the whole thing. But they were different tears than before. These felt more like release than just pain. The documentary premiered at a film festival and then got picked up by a streaming service. Suddenly, thousands of people were watching our story. My phone started blowing up with messages from people I hadn't talked to in years. Some were supportive, some were nosy and wanted details that weren't in the film. But then I started getting different kinds of messages. Women I'd never met were reaching out to tell me about their own pregnancy losses. Several of them said they'd always wondered if something wasn't right about their miscarriages. One woman named Jessica said her sister-in-law had given her herbal tea throughout her pregnancy, and she miscarried at 13 weeks. Another woman named Amanda said her mother-in-law had been weird about her prenatal vitamins, and kept trying to get her to switch brands. They wanted to know if I thought they should investigate. They wanted help figuring out if what happened to me might have happened to them too. I didn't know what to tell them at first. Most miscarriages really are just terrible random events. But some of their stories had details that felt wrong. I called Fiona and asked if she and Richard would be willing to look into a few cases. She said yes immediately. Richard started investigating Jessica's case first. He found out that the sister-in-law had been trying to get pregnant herself and had failed multiple rounds of IVF. The tea she'd given Jessica contained some of the same herbs that were in my vitamins. Richard got the leftover tea tested and it came back positive for substances known to cause miscarriage. Jessica filed a police report, and her sister-in-law was arrested. Amanda's case was harder to prove because she didn't have any of the vitamins left. But Richard interviewed the mother-in-law's friends and found out she'd been furious that Amanda was pregnant because she thought her son was too young to be a father. The mother-in-law had told multiple people she wished Amanda would lose it naturally. It wasn't enough for criminal charges, but Amanda cut off all contact and filed for a restraining order. Over the next 6 months, Fiona and Richard investigated 8 different cases. 3 of them found real evidence of tampering or sabotage. 2 more found suspicious circumstances but couldn't prove anything. The other 3 turned out to be just tragic losses with no foul play involved. But the pattern was disturbing. Richard said that medical malpractice in fertility medicine was way more common than anyone wanted to admit. Doctors who didn't follow proper protocols, clinics with terrible security, staff who didn't question suspicious behavior, and the deliberate sabotage of pregnancies, while rare, happened more often than people realized. Usually it was family members who didn't want the pregnancy to continue. Sometimes it was partners who changed their minds about having kids. The common thread was that the victims' concerns got dismissed. When they said something felt wrong, doctors told them miscarriages just happen sometimes. Nobody investigated. Nobody asked hard questions. The pattern felt disturbingly familiar to what I'd experienced. I realized I couldn't just tell my story and then go back to normal life. This was bigger than me and Lily. I started thinking about what could actually change to protect other women. I reached out to a reproductive rights organization that Michaela had mentioned before. They connected me with a lawyer who specialized in healthcare policy. Her name was Julia, and she'd been working on pregnancy protection laws for years. I told her everything I'd learned from my case and from the women who'd contacted me. She said we should try to get legislation passed that would make real changes. We started meeting every week to draft a bill. The legislation had 3 main parts. First, fertility clinics would have to implement way stricter privacy controls. Nobody except the patient and their designated medical proxy could access records. Second, it would become a specific crime to tamper with prenatal vitamins or any pregnancy-related medications. Right now, prosecutors had to use general poisoning laws, which made cases harder to prove. Third, doctors would be required to inform patients immediately about any test results, with no exceptions for withholding information at someone else's request. We called it Lily's Law. Julia said we needed to get a state legislator to sponsor it. She helped me prepare testimony for committee hearings. I was terrified of speaking in front of politicians, but I knew I had to do it. The first hearing was in front of the health committee. I sat at a table with a microphone and told them about Lily. I explained how Tom got access to my medical records and how Dr. Cooper withheld critical information. I talked about the poisoned vitamins and how Sarah was able to tamper with them because there were no specific laws against it. I told them about the other women who'd contacted me and how this wasn't just my story. Several committee members had tears in their eyes when I finished. One of them, a woman named Senator Delgado, said she'd had 3 miscarriages herself and never knew if something could have been done differently. She became the main sponsor of the bill. The legislation moved through committees over the next year. There were hearings and amendments and debates. Some people opposed it because they thought it would be too expensive for clinics to implement the new security measures. Others worried about the criminal penalties being too harsh. But Julia and I kept pushing. We got support from medical ethics organizations and patient advocacy groups. The documentary helped too because it gave people a real face and story to connect to the abstract policy arguments. 18 months after Lily died, Lily's Law passed with bipartisan support. The governor signed it in a ceremony at the state capitol. I stood next to him holding Hope, who was almost 2 years old by then. Senator Delgado gave a speech about how this law would save lives and protect vulnerable women. I got to say a few words too. I said that Lily's death had been the worst thing that ever happened to me, but if this law prevented even one other family from going through what we went through, then something good had come from something evil. Hope's 2nd birthday arrived on a sunny Saturday in May. We had a small party in our backyard with just family and a few close friends. I watched her smash cake all over her face and chase bubbles across the grass. My husband wrapped his arm around my waist and we stood there together watching our daughter laugh. I realized something had shifted inside me. The grief over Lily was still there. It probably always would be. But it didn't crush me anymore. I could think about her without falling apart. I could look at Hope without feeling guilty that she was alive and her sister wasn't. I'd learned to hold both grief and joy at the same time. They could exist together in the same moment, in the same heart. My relationship with my husband had gotten stronger through everything we'd survived. We'd built a life that honored both our daughters, the one we lost and the one we were raising. We talked about Lily regularly. We visited her tree. We kept her memory alive. But we also lived fully in the present with Hope. We didn't let the past consume our future. I still saw Michaela, but only once a month now instead of every week. We'd shifted from crisis management to maintenance. She helped me work on trusting new people without being paranoid. We practiced recognizing red flags in relationships while not assuming everyone was dangerous just because Sarah had been. I'd made new friends through Hope's playgroup at the community center. There was a mom named Jennifer whose daughter was the same age as Hope. We started having coffee while the kids played. She didn't know about my story at first, and it felt good to just be a normal mom talking about normal things like sleep schedules and teething. Eventually, I told her what had happened, and she was supportive without being weird about it. I was slowly learning that Sarah's betrayal didn't mean I could never trust anyone again. Most people were good. Most people wouldn't hurt me. I just needed to be smarter about who I let close. 2 years after the trial ended, I got a letter from the parole board. Sarah was up for her first parole hearing. I was invited to submit a victim impact statement if I wanted to oppose her early release. I sat down at my computer and started writing. I explained that while Sarah had served only 4 years of her 12-year sentence, The impact of her crime would last my entire lifetime. I would never get to watch Lily grow up. I would never know who she would have become. That loss was permanent, not something that could be undone by Sarah serving a few years in prison. I emphasized that Lily's death wasn't an impulsive act. It was carefully planned murder. Sarah had researched how to cause a miscarriage. She'd coordinated with Tom. She'd tampered with my vitamins over weeks or months. That level of premeditation showed someone who was dangerous, not someone who'd made a mistake in a moment of poor judgment. I acknowledged that Sarah had mental health issues. I didn't minimize that or pretend it wasn't real. But mental illness didn't erase responsibility. It didn't make her safe to release into society. She'd shown no genuine remorse in her letter to me a year ago. She'd mostly made excuses and blamed circumstances. Until she could fully accept what she'd done and why it was wrong, she remained a threat. The parole board held their hearing without me present. They reviewed my statement along with statements from the prosecutor and from Sarah's own psychiatrist. 3 weeks later, I got a letter saying her parole was denied. She'd serve at least another 3 years before her next hearing. Tom wasn't even eligible yet. He'd have to serve at least 10 years before his first parole hearing because of the severity of his sentence. Knowing they'd both remain in prison for the foreseeable future gave me some peace. Not because I wanted them to suffer exactly, more because I needed to know that hope was safe, that they couldn't come after us again. I'd accepted that no amount of punishment would truly balance the scales. Nothing could bring Lily back. But accountability mattered. Justice, even imperfect justice, mattered. May came around again. Lily would have been 5 years old. We drove to the park where we'd planted her cherry blossom tree 5 years earlier. Hope was 2.5 now. Old enough to sort of understand what we were doing, but not really grasp the full meaning. We'd bought a wind chime with small bells that made soft sounds in the breeze. Hope helped us hang it from one of the tree's branches. She thought it was pretty, and kept making it ring with her little hands. My husband and I stood under the tree and talked about Lily. We remembered the pregnancy, the excitement we'd felt, the nursery we'd started planning, the name we'd chosen. We talked about who she might have been. Would she have looked like Hope? Would she have had the same laugh? We'd never know, but we could imagine. We could keep her present in our family's story even though she wasn't physically with us. A few weeks later, I got an email from a literary agent in New York. She said she'd seen the documentary and read about Lily's law. She thought I should write a book about everything that had happened. She believed the story could help other survivors of betrayal and loss. It could expose the vulnerabilities in fertility medicine and push for changes in other states. I wasn't sure at first. Writing the book would mean reliving everything all over again in even more detail than the documentary required. But the agent, whose name was Sharon, said I could take as long as I needed. There was no rush. She thought this was an important story that deserved to be told fully. I talked to my husband and Michaela about it. They both supported the idea if I felt ready. I decided I was. But I had one condition. All the proceeds from the book would go to organizations supporting pregnancy loss and to funding better security measures at fertility clinics. I didn't want to profit from Lily's death. I wanted her story to help other people. Sharon agreed immediately. I spent the next year writing the book. It was harder than I expected. I had to organize all my thoughts and feelings about everything that happened. I had to write about the friendship with Sarah before it all fell apart. I had to describe the miscarriage in detail. I had to explain the investigation and the trial. The writing process was painful, but also healing in a strange way. Putting everything into words helped me process it. Seeing the full story laid out from beginning to end helped me understand how all the pieces fit together. I started reaching out to old friends while the manuscript was still in draft form. Jessica was first. We'd been close before everything exploded, part of the same church group where Sarah led worship. I texted her one afternoon asking if she wanted to meet for coffee. She responded within minutes saying yes. We met at a small cafe downtown and the conversation started awkwardly. She apologized almost immediately, saying she should have reached out sooner, that she'd been scared of choosing sides but realized there weren't sides when someone murdered a baby. She admitted she'd seen signs of Sarah's instability for years, but dismissed them as stress from her marriage. I told her I understood being caught in an impossible situation, but I'd needed support when people were attacking me online and calling me vindictive. She cried and said she was sorry, that she'd been a coward. We talked for 3 hours that day, setting new boundaries about honesty and communication. Over the next few months, I had similar conversations with 4 other friends from that time. Some apologized more genuinely than others. Some I could rebuild trust with. Others I couldn't. But the process of reconnecting helped me see that most people weren't malicious, just confused and scared when their community imploded. I kept the friendships that felt authentic, and let go of the ones that didn't. Sharon called me 2 years after I started writing to say the manuscript was ready for publication. The book came out 3 years after Lily's death, almost to the day. The publisher scheduled a modest release, not expecting huge sales, but the book took off within weeks. It hit bestseller lists and sparked conversations everywhere about reproductive coercion, medical ethics, and how the criminal justice system handles crimes against pregnant women. I did a limited book tour, speaking at bookstores and libraries in 12 cities over 2 months. At each event, I shared the story of what Tom and Sarah did, how Dr. Cooper enabled it, and how the system initially failed to recognize it as murder. Readers lined up afterward to tell me their own stories of betrayal and loss. Women who'd experienced suspicious miscarriages, families destroyed by medical malpractice, survivors of intimate partner violence during pregnancy. The response was overwhelming in the best and hardest ways. Thousands of people reached out through email and social media saying my story helped them process their own trauma, that seeing someone fight for justice gave them courage to pursue their own cases. Some days I felt energized by the impact. Other days I felt exhausted by carrying so much collective grief. But I kept showing up because Lily's story was helping people, and that gave her short life meaning beyond the horror of how it ended. Hope turned 3 the month the book came out, and by fall she was ready for preschool. I researched programs obsessively, visiting 6 different schools before choosing one with excellent security and a warm, experienced staff. The first day I dropped her off, I expected to spiral into panic about her safety. I'd prepared myself for the anxiety, had Michaela on speed dial in case I needed to talk through it. But when I walked Hope to her classroom and watched her run toward the toy kitchen without looking back, I felt something unexpected. Peace. I trusted the teachers to keep her safe. I believed the world, while containing evil like Tom and Sarah, was mostly full of good people who meant no harm. I drove home without calling Michaela, without checking the school's security cameras on my phone, without inventing scenarios where something terrible happened. At my next therapy session, I told Michaela about the milestone. She smiled and said I'd done the hard work of healing without letting the trauma define my entire life. She pointed out that 3 years ago, I couldn't imagine trusting anyone again, and now I was trusting strangers with my daughter's care. The progress felt significant, proof that healing was possible even after the worst betrayal imaginable. 4 years after the trial, I received an invitation to speak at a medical ethics conference in Chicago. The organizers had read my book and wanted me to address doctors and medical students about patient autonomy and fertility treatment. I accepted immediately, seeing it as a chance to prevent other families from experiencing what we had. The conference took place in a massive hotel ballroom filled with hundreds of physicians. I stood at the podium looking out at the audience, many of them taking notes, and told them about Lily. I explained how Dr. Cooper's decision to withhold the genetic screening results enabled Tom and Sarah's plan to murder her. I walked them through the timeline, showing how one doctor's choice to prioritize Tom's request over my right to information created the conditions for tragedy. I emphasized that patients must have complete access to their medical information, that no one else should be allowed to control what they know about their own bodies and pregnancies. The response was powerful. After my talk, a line of doctors waited to speak with me. A young resident said she'd never considered how withholding information could have such devastating consequences. An older physician admitted he'd sometimes kept concerning test results from patients to avoid causing stress, but my story showed him why that was wrong. Several doctors committed to reviewing their practices and ensuring better patient autonomy. A medical school dean asked if I'd be willing to return next year to speak to incoming students. I said yes without hesitation. 2 weeks after the conference, Daniela Sharma called me. She'd left the fertility clinic shortly after the trial, but stayed in touch occasionally to update me on the changes happening there. She told me the clinic had been completely restructured with new leadership, new security protocols, and mandatory ethics training for all staff. They'd implemented some of the strictest patient privacy protections in the country, requiring 2 forms of identification before anyone could access records and flagging any attempts by non-patients to view files. She said my case had fundamentally changed how the clinic operated, that they now viewed patient autonomy as sacred and non-negotiable. While this didn't undo what happened to Lily, knowing that future patients would be safer provided some meaning to our suffering. Daniela also mentioned that 3 other women had come forward after reading my book, reporting suspicious circumstances around their own pregnancy losses at the same clinic. Richard and Fiona were investigating those cases. The possibility that Tom and Sarah weren't the only people who'd exploited the clinic's weak security made me sick, but I was glad those women now had advocates helping them seek answers. On the 5th anniversary of Lily's death, I organized a fundraiser in her memory. We held it at a community center downtown, charging $50 per ticket with all proceeds going to 2 causes: free fertility treatment for low-income families and improved prenatal care in underserved communities. Over 100 people attended, including several women whose cases Richard and Fiona had investigated after hearing my story. We'd built a community of survivors and advocates, turning our individual traumas into collective action. The event raised $40,000. Speakers included a reproductive rights attorney, a maternal health advocate, and a state legislator who'd sponsored Lily's law. I spoke last, thanking everyone for coming and explaining how this community had helped me survive the darkest period of my life. I said we couldn't bring back the babies we'd lost, but we could fight to protect future families from the vulnerabilities and injustices we'd experienced. The applause was long and genuine. Afterward, women approached me with stories of their own losses, thanking me for creating a space where their grief was validated and their anger was justified. We stayed until the community center closed, sharing stories and contact information, building networks of support that would outlast any single event. Hope turned 5 in the spring, the same age Lily would have been. She was joyful and curious, constantly asking questions about everything she saw. She knew she had a sister in heaven named Lily. We told her age-appropriate versions of what happened, emphasizing that bad people hurt our family, but that we survived and built something good from the pain. She asked questions about Lily sometimes. Why did she die? Where is heaven? Does Lily know about me? I answered honestly while protecting her from the darkest details. I told her that some people made very bad choices that hurt Lily, but those people were in prison now and couldn't hurt anyone else. I explained that Lily would always be her sister even though they never met. Hope seemed to understand in the way young children do, accepting the information without dwelling on it. She told her preschool teacher that her sister was an angel, which made me cry when the teacher mentioned it. Hope also understood that I got sad sometimes, that certain days were harder than others. She'd crawl into my lap and pat my face, saying it was okay to feel sad and happy at the same time. Her wisdom at 5 years old amazed me. I stood at the kitchen window watching Hope play in the backyard near Lily's cherry blossom tree. The tree had grown tall and full, blooming with pink flowers every spring. Hope was pushing her toy lawnmower around the yard, narrating an elaborate story about mowing grass for the fairies. Sunlight filtered through the tree branches, casting moving shadows across the grass. I thought about the journey from that horrible moment when I opened Sarah's gift to this peaceful afternoon 5 years later. Tom and Sarah were still in prison, both denied parole at their recent hearings. Dr. Cooper's career was over, his medical license permanently revoked. Justice was served as fully as it ever can be in cases like this. More importantly, I'd reclaimed my life and built something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. I had a healthy daughter who brought joy every single day. My marriage was stronger, tested by unimaginable stress and emerging more solid. My advocacy work was helping others, preventing future tragedies and supporting survivors. I'd found a sense of peace that came from knowing I fought for Lily and won what victories were possible. The grief would always be part of me, woven into who I was now. But so would the strength I discovered through surviving the unthinkable. I could look toward the future with genuine hope rather than just determination to endure. Hope squealed with laughter as a butterfly landed on her toy lawnmower, and I smiled, feeling both sadness for the daughter I lost and gratitude for the daughter I was raising. Life held both, and I'd learned to carry them together.